Let's take it away. A lot of you probably don't know who I am. My name is Courtney. I'm the head of advice and a director at Fox and Hare, and my role includes lots of different functions. It includes HR, so very relevant for today's discussion, team management, and then compliance, product, advice delivery, business strategy, and operations. So a little bit of everything. But I'm especially excited to introduce you to Sinead Conolly, who is SEEK's 2021 Recruitment Leader of the Year and founder of Lotus People, Australia's top recruitment agency for candidate experience for 5 years in a row. So Sinead founded Lotus in 2015 with a vision to build a recruitment agency that prioritizes quality, innovation, and above all, a people-first approach. She's a true leader in the recruitment industry, strategic, passionate, and deeply committed to fostering a company culture that values balance, continuous learning, and personal development. A commitment that extends not only to her internal team, but also to the candidates and the clients she serves. So, welcome, Sinead. Thank you for joining
Thank
me.
you. Thank you so much. It is so lovely to be here. I have been really looking forward to this. As I said before, I think it's the right time of year to be thinking about it, and love that people are tuning in and sort of thinking about getting on the front foot for next year. So thank you for having me.
Brilliant. So, today we'll be covering three topics: how to create a standout resume, how to make a great and lasting impression in interviews, and how to negotiate your salary and other benefits. So, let's start with talking resumes. Sinead, I imagine you see a lot of resumes in your role. What are you looking for when you're selecting a candidate and you're sort of, working through hundreds of resumes for one job?
For sure. Yeah. Look, we have a team of 20 or so, 2021. And I'd say we get through thousands and thousands of resumes every week. So it really is something that it is funny because for me, I have the hat on of obviously working in recruitment, running an agency, having a team who are very involved with recruitment, but then also I am that person in my personal life where if family, friends, they're looking for a new role, they need some support with their own job search. That's obviously where all of that experience is able to be channeled. And so yeah, look, it's definitely something that for us, I think simplicity, the way that sort of technology and CRMs and databases and everything work now is we're using sort of AI and technology and everything else. And so I think people who avoid PDFs, who avoid the graphics, who avoid the sort of overly complicated, convoluted resumes are really the ones that are going to just catch the eye more easily. So I think simple. We always use Calibri 11. We really do just look for resumes that sort of paint the picture. I think any short bullet points, really brief, aren't necessarily going to convey a lot, and so relatively I want to say elaborate on bullet points, relatively lengthy, obviously not too lengthy, but just enough detail that anyone who's looking at it and is spending not a huge amount of time on it is able to go, okay, amazing. That's got key details. That's got achievements listed. I can see that they're using driver words like and action words like led and took ownership of and responsible for and that kind of language. So yeah, simplicity and sort of detail and relevance, of course, are probably the main things that we'd look for.
Yeah, awesome. And obviously, AI is a buzzword in most industries. I'm really interested to hear about how you use AI to vet these applications. Is it that the AI tool will look for certain buzzwords? Will it, maybe rule people out? How does the tool actually work?
Yeah, for sure. Look, we have we have a whole tech stack, and every agency does, and they all sort of none are like everywhere, none are a one size fits all, so they all sort of interlink with each other. But for us, like as you said before, we have a huge focus on candidate experience, and I think the conversation in recruitment and in the industry of employment at the moment is how do we leverage the tech to sort of be able to maybe streamline some of the processes, but also maintain the human connection. And so I don't really know of any organizations that are being completely kind of AI focused and tech focused and not remaining not keeping the human side. So for us, exactly that. Like it's information that might come through in an email, parses through to the system. Yes, AI can scan buzzwords. If we have information about a job, AI might produce resumes that attach to it. I think it's well worth applicants being aware that a lot of organizations now, and obviously it will continue to shape in that way, will be utilizing AI. And so things like keywords, achievements, simplicity, like I mentioned before, are really going to help not get lost in the system. I know back in the day, PDFs would just not sync with our system at all. And if you're working with an agency, they'll always want a Word document so they can brand your resume. So it is actually the simplicity that is probably a constant from when I started in recruitment many, many years ago to now as well. And I think no one's nailed the AI integrations yet because it is so new. We can automate things and we can obviously try and test and leverage it. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's sort of going to take away the job of people actually being involved in the recruitment process when someone's looking for work.
Yeah, super interesting. And the simplicity piece really resonates with me as well. You know, we get hundreds of applications for every job post that we do at Fox and Hare. And although color and as much information on a page as possible is lovely when there's just one resume to look at, when you're looking at hundreds, it makes it really difficult to get a grasp of who the candidate actually is and the key points that you're sort of looking for. So,
100%. And if you think about how many resumes, someone who's receiving hundreds for a role or hundreds for many roles, if you think about the actual time spent on each resume, we have to get very quick at it. And so there isn't going to be a huge amount of time allocated to sort of getting past any barriers or blocks that might have been in there.
yeah, brilliant. And have you had any, examples of real standout resumes that you've seen that you can share with us?
Honestly, I think because what we're sort of looking for is that cohesiveness, I think when it is that, and it's like what I described before, that Calibri 11, everything is chronological, everything makes sense. Duties are sort of well worded and relatively chunky. Achievements are all really clear. Like we get many resumes like that, but maybe a small percentage for every application. So it actually isn't as common as you'd think. So I wouldn't say there's been one sort of utopia of one pinnacle of good resume, but yeah, definitely anything that falls into that category we would look favorably on.
Yeah, and even thinking about my experience, I think about 10 years ago, it was like a buzz to think of some really creative ways to drop in a resume. Like I remember there was a guy who delivered donuts, and within the donut, was his resume, and he got hired. But now I think the ones that stand out are the ones that have applied for the job and the details are relevant to the job and they're clear and easy to read. Are
100%.
definitely the standouts.
And I'd say the exception to that would be to sort of exception to what I said earlier would be graphic designers, software engineers. Like I've seen some amazing sort of websites that have been a resume and someone displaying their work. And I think things like that, absolutely, it's a completely different ball game. But I also think if you are going through talent acquisition teams, again, just keep in mind that their volume of resumes and information they're seeing is really, really high. So definitely a few exceptions, but I'd say 90% of roles, keep it clean.
Yeah, brilliant. We definitely don't need graphic design in financial advice.
Nor in recruitment, although we do, our marketing manager does do that, so maybe we do.
Yeah. So obviously we've talked about simplicity, we've talked about the resume sort of making sense and being chronological. Is there anything else that you think is really, really important for a candidate to think about when they're preparing their resume?
Yeah, look, I think one thing that's definitely worth touching on, as we obviously spoke about AI before, is just using ChatGPT. And I actually went through this with my cousin who recently arrived from London and was looking for work. And you can obviously use ChatGPT to create an entire resume. But I think what we see in all of the resumes that we see now that are clearly written by ChatGPT is that or by any AI language model, there's clearly sort of yes, an essence of it being written by that rather than by the person. So I think where you could use it and where I sort of worked through it with my cousin when I was showing her was if, for example, you want to create maybe one role where you put in your duties, but you had a really similar role, or for example, you want to have your bullet points in a certain style, and then the rest of the bullet points were a lot more sparse. You could sort of in chunks go in and say, can I have the rest of this in the same style of as what I've just written? And so it can really help. I think it's very wise to even ask ChatGPT how can you give me an example of 10 bullet points of what this what success in a role like mine would look like, or even putting in the job description, putting in your own resume and saying, can you write achievements or pull out the key experience that I've done that relates to this role, or can you write me a cover letter that sort of matches the two together? So I think absolutely use it. I would say to everyone to use it when you're job searching, when you're doing anything. I'm obsessed with AI and ChatGPT and everything, everything in my life, including cooking, including like everything,
Oh my
travel.
gosh,
It all goes
amazing.
through, literally, it all goes through ChatGPT. So I'd say definitely use it, but absolutely have to speak to what we were speaking about earlier in having that human contact and human connection. I think you really have to put your own stamp and your own personality on everything that you're writing because it's very easy for people to know what's written by generative AI.
Yeah, so sort of use it to start the work and to create the foundation, and then it's important to sort of build on that and put your own touch on it.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. What about common mistakes that you've seen? It sounds like people just using AI completely to generate their resume is a mistake. Is there anything else that you've seen?
I think, like, honestly, I think everything we've just covered. I think probably one thing actually with mistakes is perhaps including things that without even realizing might cause um, unconscious bias. So, for example, I see candidates who, and we see it all the time, candidates who might be applying for a role and they just have their email address on there and it has their date of birth, or and it's not conscious. Like I think but it gives people an opportunity to have unconscious bias, and because they're being read so quickly, I think you want to give yourself the best foot forward, and so providing information that's going to be information for the role, but perhaps you're not sure. And even I say mistake, bias, but also I think like I've had email addresses that are like personal ones that are slightly wacky and like things that sort of keep it professional, but also keep it like protect yourself within it as well. Like I wouldn't put date of birth, I wouldn't share your referee details until you need to. Like I think within sort of the all of the format of what I mentioned before, I think definitely having a sort of objective eye on your resume before you send it to say, is there anything in here that people might not look favorably on?
Yeah, so no, like Hot Babe 1993 at Hotmail.
Happens. It happens. It happens far too frequently. I'm
Oh my
like,
gosh.
create a new Gmail.
Yeah.
Get a work one.
What about photos? It seems to be a big trend that people are putting photos on their resume. Is that something that you would think would play into that bias
I think
piece?
that firmly sits in the category of creating, and you don't know who's reading it, you don't know what their life experience is, you don't know anything about where it's going. And I think things like that's exactly the type of personal information, date of birth, email address, anything that sort of gives it away. I think photos completely align with that. And so yeah, I think that's definitely something.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's sad, but I completely agree. And
Yes, for sure.
it's not something that I think at Fox and Hare would be a big problem, but I certainly see it in the wider financial advice industry,
Yeah.
sadly.
Mhm.
What about things like LinkedIn? So that's obviously it's not a photo, but it is a link to your personal world, and it does have photos and other personal information on it.
Yeah.
How do you feel about including a LinkedIn profile on a resume?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'd bulk it out. I think include similar to the resume, people will go there. Some interviewers and talent acquisition teams, recruiters will, some won't. But I think having it as an additional thing to sort of profile yourself is definitely worthwhile doing. It's just another sort of foot in the door if someone does take the time to look at it.
Is that something that you would do when you're assessing a candidate?
I think it depends. We have some clients who every single person we send, they look. I think it depends on the role. It depends on if they're in marketing. I probably would want to see how they market themselves. But it definitely depends. But yes, I would go in with the idea that assume everyone's going to look online, because yeah, it's likely that they will.
We've definitely looked in the past, we'll sort of narrow it down to our top candidates and then we'll have a look at their LinkedIn and we're looking at things like, what posts are they liking? Are they interacting with the Fox and Hare LinkedIn? What are their interests? So probably less about the professional history because you get that from the resume, but
Yeah,
more about how they're engaging online. It is really interesting to see.
for sure.
What key things would you be looking for if you're jumping on somebody's LinkedIn?
Look, I think similar to you, when we're hiring for ourselves, I would go on LinkedIn and it would be exactly that. It would be their engagements, sort of what they're posting, if they're posting. Like we do a lot on LinkedIn, so personal branding is important to us, and so how they post, how frequently they post, like all of that stuff, I think is definitely relevant. And also just doing the bare minimum. You could leave LinkedIn as an empty shell, or you can fill it out and jazz it up and like really make it good. So yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. All right. Well, let's move on to our second topic of the day, how to make a great and lasting impression in interviews. This is always a very hot topic. So you've got your foot in the door, you've got your great resume after all of Sinead's hot tips. What are the most important steps a candidate should take to prepare for an interview?
Yeah, for sure. This is such a big one, and it's something that we are guiding people through every single day in what we do. And then, as I say, when my friends and family are going through it, we're seeing the other side of it. And as a business, we're very committed to being values based and also giving people a good experience because it is a sensitive time in your life and it's obviously an important time. So I think there's a lot to be said on this topic, because you want to nail it. Some people hate interviews. Some people are just not suited to it. Some people absolutely love it. So I think there's definitely things that you can do to really maximize your chance at interview stage. It is worth noting that sort of between government, public sector, private businesses, very formal panels versus sort of more conversational, informal styles, it is going to differ, and the advice definitely sort of differs. But I would say sort of the three main things you could do in terms of your preparation is the most important bit. And I think the three things that you should be looking at when you're looking at research is researching the company, researching the role itself and your suitability for it. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail. And then also researching the person. I know for me, whenever back in the day before I had my own business and didn't need to interview, or I did need to interview, I would always want to research the person that I was going to meet. And I really think that if you have nerves around interviews or you just want to do really well at it, understanding who you're meeting, everything we were just saying about LinkedIn, jumping on your LinkedIn, their LinkedIn, understanding their career history, their trajectory, seeing if you can spot any reasons that they might be in the role that they're in now or the company that they're in now, what they tend to like and engage or post. And even just sort of pointing to that, it makes you feel quite sort of prepared going in, like you have a bit of an understanding of who you're meeting, but then even sort of mentioning or referencing that in an interview, like, for example, I saw that you're super active on LinkedIn. Is personal branding something that's really important to the business? Like that's a type of question that's quite different to asking something a little bit more transactional. So yeah, I think researching the company, and when I speak about that, I probably mean less about we were established in 2002 and more about what are their values, what do they care about, what's important to them, really focusing on sort of their culture. Every business puts so much emphasis into and time into understanding their employer brand and market, how they can leverage their employer brand to attract good people. And so I think understanding what their messaging is around that, and then really sort of seeing how that aligns with you and what about that appeals, and tying that into your interview is going to be a really a really good approach.
Yeah, brilliant. And I know that some organizations will sort of book in an interview and it's not overly transparent who you're meeting with. I think my advice would be to ask. There's always going to be someone behind the scenes who's booked in to meet with you. If you don't know who that is, ask them. It's fine to ask them. And then something else that I find is really, really helpful when I'm interviewing people, or really insightful, is what questions do they have for me? So, do they understand what the job is, or do they have any questions about the company? That tells me that they have done their research and they are really interested in the role. So, even if you've got a couple of questions prepared, I think that's really helpful.
For sure. And I think kind of thinking about what they are is really important as well. Like I said before, if you're really well researched, if you're really clear on sort of what the business is, what the role is, their values, their culture, you can ask more specific questions. And I think really kind of nutting into sort of what this person is expecting. For example, some questions we always suggest candidates ask is, what challenges do you see for someone stepping into this role? And what does good look like for 6 months' time? Like in 6 months' time, how do you want this person to be performing? And what ideally are you looking for in this person? Like I think every person who's interviewing is probably in a place where they're squeezed. They are either understaffed or they're growing. And usually it is a case that people are really busy. And so really getting into their psyche of like, what if I get this and this is going well and you offer me the role, I would like to know, like, what is it going to be like when I get in there? Of course, you can ask things like training and onboarding. Those questions are important, but I think kind of putting yourself in the shoes of the person interviewing and being like, how can I solve the problem that you currently have, is definitely a good, a good tactic.
Yeah, and can you share an example of a candidate who did make a really great impression during an interview and what they did right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I think about this, I probably think more recently I've been involved more in direct hiring than recruiting for our clients. But we have had growth and we've hired this year. And I think for me, the people, we've interviewed a lot of people. Like we have, similar to you guys, we have high standards. We want to make sure we're bringing the best people in. And so for me, the people that I think of one girl who started with us relatively recently, she listened to our podcasts. I think people who sort of go above and beyond. So we had one, her name is Chloe. She started with us and she had reached out, explained why she wanted to work for a female-led business, really clearly said how her experience was relevant, mentioned what she was looking for, essentially said how she could solve our problem. We were looking for someone. She had just seen that someone had recently left on LinkedIn. And then she came and she just knew all about us, all about the culture, had listened to our podcasts, none of which are essential for an interview. But when someone has that much context and they know so much about you and what you stand for and what the business stands for, it made the process really easy because, of course, however many months, maybe 2 or 3 months later, she's everything that she demonstrated in that interview absolutely follows through into how she is. So I think that level of preparation and eagerness, like it's not even just prep because we all have full-time jobs and everyone's busy. But yeah, I think having that, expressing that eagerness is really important.
Yeah, definitely. Small business. I know you love your business, Sinead, and we love Fox and Hare. Seeing people who are just as passionate about the respective businesses, it was really, really exciting. You sort of go, how can I not love you? We
Sure.
both love the same thing.
Completely. And I think that really translates even to bigger, because you're exactly right about small businesses, and I completely agree. And then I also think about we know a lot of people in Canva, we know a lot of people in Atlassian, and equally everyone wants to work there. But those who sort of stand above are the ones that go a bit deeper and sort of really are proactive and do the reach out. And I didn't touch on it before, but that follow up, that responsiveness, that easily available, being easily available, is just things that are all adding up as green flag, green flag, green flag. As soon as there's a call not returned, as soon as there's a few minutes late for a meeting, like you really just want to be accumulating the green flags and absolutely avoid any red flags over the course of the weeks that you are interviewing for somewhere.
Yeah, what are some of those red flags? What are some of the common mistakes you see in interviews or around interviews, like, being late or not being responsive?
Mhm. It's honestly like it still blows my mind. I think I'm 13 years into recruitment, and it still blows my mind how people doing what you would expect to be sort of the bare minimum or just what you would expect. It's rare. Like honestly, the more common thing is for people to not show up, both organizations and candidates, people to not show up, no follow-up emails, no confirmation if the email was sent to confirm the interview, no confirmation, but they do show up, not returning calls, sorry, I was busy, not getting back to emails, I must have missed it. I think it's very, very common for that whole, and again, everyone's busy, but if this is a priority for anyone looking for work, being that person who is making everyone else's life easier by being accessible and responsive, it is really important. And it honestly is. If you think, of course, that's such a basic thing to say, it is just so not done. Someone from the very first stage of application being completely responsive and professional and kind of eager the whole way through to the end is a very small percentage of people, because people have other roles, they have other things, they're in a job themselves. Like there's just a lot happening that means that yeah, the basics sort of don't happen. So yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think if you've got two great candidates and you've got one who's been less accessible or maybe rescheduled the meeting and one who didn't and is accessible, you're always going to make the easy choice with the accessible one who didn't reschedule. So,
Sure.
yeah, I completely agree. What about tips for sort of following an interview? How can interviewees leave a lasting positive impression?
Yeah, look, it ties in with what I said at the beginning, when we were talking about prep. So I think that research piece, it's hard not to be confident going into an interview when you have pulled on previous examples, memories, go through your resume, go through what it was like when you started. I think really sitting with yourself for an hour or two, and it doesn't need to be for every interview, but just whilst you're in this process and bringing all of those details to mind and really remembering not what you're doing now and where you're at now, but going back and looking at the archives in your brain, and actually sort of refreshing yourself on all of that. I think the best way that someone can, and again, we had a situation recently, with someone very recently last week with someone who we were interviewing. And what I loved about how she interviewed was that she was really easily able to intertwine her wins and the achievements and the things that she clearly moved the dial on and made a big impact on into conversation. It was a, and again, this is slightly different than if you're doing panel interviews. It is a different approach, but then a lot of it still applies. So I think with that, I think really sort of speaking to, you're in the conversation, it's flowing, it's natural, but then you're saying exactly like when I was in my last role and as a team we worked together, but then I was able to drive XYZ. And I think flipping between I and we, I think if you're entirely I, the interviewer is thinking, was there a we? And if you're entirely we, it's reflective of if you're team focused and we as a collective. And I think there's research that women probably do this more, but I think making sure that you as an individual also speak to what you achieved and how you drove that particular project or whatever, that's definitely important as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And completely agree. Okay, so now we've been offered the job and we want to negotiate salary and other benefits. Obviously, that's a topic that a lot of people find very intimidating, myself included. What are the first steps a candidate should take to prepare for these discussions?
Yeah. It's such a hard one and it's such a big topic, and there's so much that I can say and add value on. My sister, she was going through a with a couple of different companies in Dublin, and I guided her through the whole process from the resume to the interview prep through to being offered the role, and she hated it. Her natural sort of character is like, I do not want confrontation. I'll just take the lower salary. And my fiance, he literally went through the exact same thing last year when he was getting a new job. And I think there's a few things. I think what I would suggest more practically is when you are looking for work from the first conversation through to the last is give a range. Obviously, do your research, of course, go on Seek, go on LinkedIn, look at the information that's out there, have an idea yourself. Of course, we get candidates who pitch themselves way above market. And you don't want to be that person because, of course, that's just unrealistic. But you also don't want to be the person who might have been underpaid in their last role. They're happy to take the same. Like, you want to really make sure that you are going in at a rate that is market rate. And I think the best time to look for a salary increase is when you are moving jobs. I've seen across hundreds of businesses, clients and organizations and businesses are way more likely to say, we'll give an extra 5K here than they would in a performance review, or you kind of have to put a bit more of a business case once you're in. So I think definitely have a range. The worst thing that you can do is sort of say, look, I'm looking for 100K, get to the get to the offer stage, and then say, do you know what? I'm actually now looking for 120K. I think it wastes time. It's probably not entirely transparent. I think there's an art to doing it. So I would always say, look, give a range. You don't necessarily need to reveal what you were on previously. If you're working with a recruiter, they'll want to know, but they'll also be advocating. They should be advocating for you to kind of get that higher range. But I think if you give a range, then there's no sort of surprises when you do get to that final point. So I think also, to our point, I know you said some people hate it. I think just being confident and strong in backing yourself. Again, and I don't mean to sort of speak to gender or anything, but there is definitely research that says that men are more likely to ask for and receive a higher salary at the negotiation stage when offered a role. So it does, a lot of it come down to confidence and to actually asking the question. In terms of, do you want me to go into sort of how to approach it? I'm kind of bulking this whole section.
Yeah, no,
Like I have
this is
so much
all really
information.
valuable. Go for
I said
it.
I could talk a lot about this.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
so yeah, I think having the range in the first instance is definitely important. I think when you do get down to actually being offered the role, assume that 90% of the time the organization is going to come in at the lower end. There are variables such as what the internal team are being paid. Sometimes we come up against situations where we want someone that's slightly higher, but we have an equity situation and we just won't bring someone in who's going to suddenly be over the banding, the levels of what everyone else is on. So that's obviously a consideration for businesses. And then also bandings. Some organizations do have sort of set bandings and don't have budgets. So it's worth keeping in mind that asking is great, but there often is restrictions within a business that means they can't actually do it, but it's absolutely worth a try. So I think once you've done your range and once you've sort of got through to the end, the person can offer you the role. And if you feel that it's at the lower end of what you're offering, there usually is an opportunity to go back and say, look, appreciate that. One thing to do is definitely leverage other processes. So whilst my sister absolutely hated doing this, the reason that I was able to get her to do it is because she did have another process, and that was paying 10K more. And this one was her dream role. It was what she wanted. And she said, I'll just take it. Like, I want this one more. But I think when you have, I kind of coached her through saying, look, I've got this other position. This one is my preferred. It's really important to demonstrate that eagerness, that commitment, that same sort of responsiveness and eagerness that you have throughout the whole process. You don't want to now flip and say, well, I've got other options and I've got other places I can go. It still needs to be in the same sort of style and in the same in the same way. But I think saying, look, I've got other things. There's another role I applied for. There's an interview that I've gone for. There's a few roles I've seen online. It doesn't really matter what else is happening, but using it as leverage to say, look, this is kind of the reason why the value I can add, and this is the reason why I want it. I would like to go higher, and they might come back and say yes, as they did in my sister's case. They might come back and say that they will meet you halfway. You could also write in a 6 month, if they can't sort of have it because of levels or something, or budget. You can say, "Can if I hit XYZ, can I have it in 6 months' time?" So there's definitely ways and means, and organizations usually when they get to the stage of offer, it is so much more preferable to select the person in front of them who they really liked, who was really good, and find an extra 5K, 10K, whatever it is, rather than face going back to the whole drawing board and doing it all again. So you definitely have a lot of leverage as an individual.
Yeah, really insightful. And all of that definitely resonates with me in a small business. You know, we've got budgets, sometimes we just can't afford it. But in the past, we've definitely sort of agreed in 6 months' time to bump someone's salary up and you know, some of the other things that you've mentioned there. Negotiating benefits is obviously often overlooked as well. What are some of the additional benefits that candidates should be considering and asking for, and how can they approach that conversation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think everyone who's listening, who is or watching and thinking, I am obviously kind of thinking about my own career in the new year and my own approach. I think the things that you need to be really clear on are what are most important to you. There's a cost of living, interest rates are high. We obviously need to, yeah, be able to pay bills, etc. But at the same time, to some people, remote working, hybrid working, flexibility, school pickup, um, even investment in growth. If you're at the stage of your life where you just want to progress and grow, and a business has a $5,000 allocation for training courses, or has a world-class onboarding and training program, like I think being really clear yourself on what's important to you and what you want. I think we can get caught up in money, and the money is so important, and you want to feel like you're being paid fairly. But I also think, to your point, there's also a lot of other things that can make up a good package. And we've seen that a lot, I think, since COVID and the rise of hybrid working, and the desire for people to sort of have I guess, a more balanced approach to work and to life. It's really led to packages being focused more on the holistic package of flexibility and days in and out of the office, rather than just that dollar figure. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of different benefits, and people might be really interested in wellness and gym memberships, or having some access to psychology or counseling or EAP programs. So there's definitely a lot, and I think it comes down to what is important for you as an individual.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, we have some employees in Cebu in the Philippines, and they love rice. We've just given them a rice allowance.
I love that. That's
When it
amazing.
comes to sort of, you know, really tailoring the benefits,
Yeah.
companies will do it. They will think out of the box if you give them the opportunity to do
Yeah.
so. So,
The first
yeah.
time I've ever heard that. I absolutely love it. I feel like you need a rice cooker in the office if you're going to be giving out all that rice.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And it is a good point. Like, there's different, and I think it's about adjusting it. Businesses adjusted as well, because what we gave pre-COVID is different to what we do now. So I think being clear on what you want is important.
Yeah, brilliant. All right. Well, let's throw over to our participants for some questions. I see there's one in the chat.
Yes.
We've got Gavin. He's asking, what is the optimal length for a CV and how many pages?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it was something that I had written down to share, and I didn't. So thank you for for following me up on that. Look, I it is an important question, because I think what we tend to see is people being really fixated on length and shoveling everything into 1 or 2 pages, really small bullet points, not much information. in line with everything I said earlier about being elaborate on being able to kind of lengthen your bullet points, being able to include achievements, like that isn't conducive with having a 1 or 2 page resume, depending on how long your career is. So look, I would say the average is 3 or 4. I think when you're tipping into 5, 6, 7, that's too long. We don't look at resume length as a like it just isn't something that's important. What is important is chronological order, the most recent roles including the most. So 5+ years ago, include a couple of lines on what you were responsible for. So yeah, so if I were to need a resume, I would go back and include those, but the bullet points would be one or two. So I think to answer your question, it definitely is something that's important, Gavin, but it's like just don't have it too long, but definitely don't try and condense it unnecessarily.
And another question from Martha. When you're applying for a job where there are 100 plus applicants, is there anything you should do differently?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And I think when we do market research, we speak to we're conducting a survey at the moment of asking our candidates' experiences in recruitment in the market in 2024. And more often than not, the biggest pain point is just the fact that there is so much competition and there are hundreds of applications to a position. I think from an insider's perspective, and again, Courtney, we spoke to this earlier, most of those applications aren't relevant. And most of them, like, there's so many reasons that people apply. But a lot of people, particularly with how easy it is now on Seek and LinkedIn, they just hit buttons and the actual level of follow through and commitment is relatively low. We would get hundreds of applications for a role and we might call 20 people and we might get 5 call us back. So I think don't be disheartened by the fact that there are that many, first of all. And then I think just relevance. Use ChatGPT, write a concise cover letter that might be included on LinkedIn or Seek, or if you're sending directly to a company, really cover off what you've done. Like, make it easy for them. It doesn't need to be a big sort of cover letter, but just make it easy for them. I've done this and this is why I'm suitable. And the reality is most organizations are going to be looking at the applicants who are most relevant, and who have done something similar. And so it gets hard to really stand out in that massive amount of people if it's not relevant and if it's not going to make their lives easier by instantly saying amazing. And I think another thing you can do, just to add to that, sorry, is also speaking to reaching out to the relevant hiring managers on LinkedIn, who's in their talent acquisition team, who would be if it's a marketing role, who's the chief marketing officer. Hiring is at the absolute forefront of every executive and every manager's mind because it is so hard. It takes up so much time. And so anything you can do to make their lives easier, pop into their LinkedIn messages, send an email, go an extra step than just sending an application.
Yeah, brilliant. One from George. When a cover letter is requested, what type of information would you be looking for as opposed to what is covered by the resume? Great question.
Yeah, really good question. And I'll speak to my experience and sort of how we train the team. But I think for me, it's concise. It's really just saying, hi, I've seen this role, expressing genuine excitement. I'm really excited about this role. So many people, as I say, do bulk applications. So I think to even show, okay, here, this person actually knows what role they're applying for. So this particular role has really excited me. I've done XYZ. I am looking for XYZ. Your culture or your values completely align with what I'm looking for. Really just matching and showing them how it matches and keeping it as see my resume attached. What we see a lot in cover letters is almost a replica. I've done X amount of years here and I've done X amount of years here and I've developed all these XYZ very easy, very sort of transferable skills that everyone has. I think you want to avoid all of that and you just want to make it really easy of, I'm genuinely interested. I'm really excited about this. This is what I've done. And if it's really relevant to what they're looking for, that will sort of stand out in people's minds.
What about often in job ads, the company, the hiring company will put dot points about what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Often I see people sort of addressing those dot points in their cover letter. Would you say that that is a good idea?
Yeah, I think it's I think I think yes, I think you want to sort of I almost think that because I think it's two ways. I think it's they're interviewing you, you're interviewing them. Like I think you can do that, but it's almost like addressing, you get that in government or education, like addressing selection criteria. If we go back to what we said earlier of like, there's like 6 seconds that people, and I think there's, again, all of my research is not being very well cited, but I have seen something that's like hiring managers spend 6 seconds on a resume. And I think with that in mind, going into a lot of detail on it just probably isn't the best use of time.
Brilliant. All right. Well, we might have one last question for today. One from Maria. She said, you mentioned PDF resumes are often not able to be used by organization recruitment tools. Would this automatically exclude an applicant? So she's saying she sees a trend with Canva resumes being used that work better in PDF, but not in documents.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good question. And they absolutely wouldn't be excluded. And again, some people, depending on the role, if you're going for a marketing role and you've created this amazing Canva presentation, you've put time into it, that ties in with everything we were speaking about going above and beyond. So I think by no means have it as like a blanket rule of like PDFs are going to break the internet and you're never going to get a job. But I think if it is a mostly text-based resume, the preference would be for a role that's probably non-creative, I would say. The preference would definitely be just put it in a format that's kind of easy to access and easy to parse through to any system. But no, I think it's definitely not every system takes like we see very, very varied resumes. And we look at them all, of course, but yeah, I think it's probably just a preference if you're thinking about those non-creative roles. If you're in something creative, then absolutely go for your life. I'm sure people will, yeah, be extremely interested in Canva and in how you can use it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today, Sinead. I know I've learned a lot. And thank you, everyone, for joining us and for your wonderful questions. We'll see you at our next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.